Would you like to support Cubs Out Loud? One way is to join us over on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, patrons get early access to our shows, the pre- and post-show, and various other rewards. You can learn more at patreon.com/CubsOutLoud. Thanks to all our patrons for their support in making this podcast. It's Sunday, February 16th, 2025. I'm Jeff.
Who's your bear? That's right. I am your bear.
I'm Damon.
I don't brew the tea, I just serve it.
And that makes me Gary.
Everyone else is thinking it, and I just say it.
Welcome to Cubs Out Loud, the Bear Podcast of Indeterminate Length, episode number 775. Just 25 episodes to our 800th. God, we're old. And of course, we got Edward Angelini-Cooke here. Oh! The good doctor.
Yay! The doctor's in the house.
Whoop, 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 whoop.
Welcome back, Ed.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
You've been gone for a little while.
I sure have. Scheduling's a mess.
Well, somebody decided to become an off-Broadway star, apparently, and go do productions. Got the stage bug.
Mm-hmm.
So you were in a little show, something about the Full Monty?
Yeah. I did that the end of January into February. Just 2 weekends. In Wilmington, Delaware, right? This little theater, a 1/10 of a mile from my house. And it was great. It was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Are you serious that the theater is like less than a quarter mile from your house?
Yeah. Absolutely. I could walk there, but not in January.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
as he goes and just looks out the window towards it, apparently, like, wow,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, I hope that it was an enjoyable experience for you.
It sure was. Getting naked in front of 200 people at a time is exhilarating and awesome.
Nice.
I have something to say, but I'm not going to. Maybe post-show.
So, since it's a bit of a brave thing to do, to step out and do that particular show, what is your takeaway from it? Like, any particular lesson learned or thing that you learned about yourself, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, the whole getting naked thing isn't something that I'm not used to. I mean, I think during the audition process and everything, one of the character that I played is a very meek, sad and lonely person who lives with his mom and doesn't have any friends, and he, in the beginning he's suicidal.
Aw.
And it really forced me to get in touch with some points in my life that I was not excited about. So and not really a spoiler, but his mom dies in the second half of the show, and he has a whole thing about that, and so it caused me to revisit parts of my life that were rather painful, and it felt very cathartic. It felt very, very good. So, when people ask me, was it really hard getting naked? I said, no, it was more difficult revisiting difficult parts of my life.
That's fair.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The things people don't necessarily expect.
Exactly. So when people were crying after the show saying that they really loved my performance, they weren't talking about me being naked. They were talking about my vulnerability um and the fact, and my character's journey.
Love it.
Cool. Well, I'm glad
Yeah.
that it was enjoyable and you were entertaining for the masses.
Yeah. It was good. It was a sad one to say goodbye to.
Oh, I feel that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're happy to have you back.
Mm-hmm.
You and I had kind of talked about an idea of some stuff. It got prompted, I think, over a couple of different things. And there was a online thing that I sent you. We kind of had a brief conversation about it, and it ended up bringing us to where we are today. So I'm intrigued. Like, yes, this is the landscape of relationships, and I realize it might seem a little interesting. We decided on relationships with labels as today's discussion, but I think you'll have to help us all be aware of where we're going with this, or what we intend to say with that.
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, I just recently got diagnosed with ADHD.
Huh.
And it's been interesting, right? Because this is a population that I work with a lot. I work with a lot of populations that have, labels, right? So, um, I just started taking a training on a specific, I've talked about it on this podcast before, but acceptance and commitment therapy when working with people who have ADHD. And it starts off talking about the label of ADHD, right? And how people can really grab on tightly to these labels. And when Gary reached out and said about these kind of like these online quizzes that we can take that kind of give us labels, it got me thinking about the various like our relationship with the various labels that we have in our lives, and how I have seen that they can have really benefit impacts, but also sometimes not so great impacts. So I thought that would be a good thing for us to talk about. And yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think the key thing was that we see these things that come through like social media, and people are like, oh, like back in the day it was what was it, BuzzFeed? It was like, oh, take this quiz and learn, like what Disney princess you are or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that stuff kind of expounded over time, and we've done it on here. We've done the BDSM test and the kink test. And so it was something similar to that. And I sent it to Ed because I was like, oh, hey, have you seen this? Because I find it interesting that people are using the technology to help people better understand themselves. And I think that's the intention of the tool. And yet, to Ed, I think your point was like people sometimes don't like limit it in that perspective, like use it as a way to learn about themselves. Instead, they kind of like they ascribe it and they take on a new label, and they're like, oh, I'm blah 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 blah. Like here's a really like probably not very good parallel, and I might get some hate for this. I don't care for the personality test stuff. The I don't know what it is. It's been big, and it like they still kind of talk about it like here and there. It's the one that like describes you with the letters.
Myers-Briggs.
Yes, I'm an INFP or whatever it is. And so like, well, I understand like those things can be helpful. I feel like people, I think they really feel the need that they want to have something that explains them. And so they kind of want a shorthand to use that to like help, I guess, create connection with other people. Hence they choose the label, like, and want to put that out there. And while I can understand that because this is Cubs Out Loud and we ascribe ourselves as bears, like, and also gangsters and like those are all labels. But at the same time, I'm like, like, I don't know. I think people take some stuff very seriously. And I'm kind of like, I guess my philosophy is, girl, it's not that serious. Like, so
I mean, yeah.
And I'm not, and I want to make it clear, I'm not making fun of like Ed's coming out to us in Revelation about his ADHD. That is not what I'm saying. I'm just feeling like some people, you know.
I think the difference between Ed coming out and saying he's ADHD is different than him like, oh, I'm sorry I was so late, I have ADHD, or oh, I can't do this because I have ADHD. Like that, those kind of like where you're taking it to that like blaming a lot of things on the fact that you have this label ascribed to you is a big part of it. We it was very much hitting when you're talking, like, Gary, the thing that was hitting me the most was like, yeah, like there are people all the times that like, we can just talk about the zodiac and be like, well, I'm a Scorpio, so I do this, and I'm la la la, and then I'm mysterious and deep and sexual and whatever. These are words I have used to describe myself because I'm a Scorpio. But is that really it, or is it the things that I have attached to it, or someone has attached to it because it makes sense in the grander scheme of things?
I mean, people want to.
Yeah.
People want definition. They want to be able to understand, and sometimes a label helps them understand a specific thing. I mean, our community is no stranger to labels, which have grown in number through the years.
What are you talking about? Top, bottom, verse, side. Anyways.
Bears, cubs, otters, puppies, pups, ponies, gay, straight,
right, and I think,
lesbian, asexual, bisexual.
I mean, Demi.
Polyamorous.
Yeah, I mean, Polly. I mean, we could just do this all night long. The thing is that yes, I agree, Jeff. Like we've talked about it before in previous episodes. This is how we navigate the world. As a human species, we label things, we contextualize it so like we can understand, especially in communicating with others, what this thing is. So like the light is on, the light is off. Like we have to be able to find a way to say something for others to understand it. And usually it's when we make new labels or define things that were not previously defined but have always existed, I think that people become resistant to the concept of a label. And I'm like, bitch, we've been using labels forever. That's like people fighting about pronouns. You've had pronouns. They've been around for a long goddamn time. Calm down. He says, anyways.
Ed.
Yeah, like like there are theories, right, that talk about this, right? Like in sociology and criminology, right? So there's a theory, social identity theory, developed or first talked about in 1979, right? That kind of talks about that our sense of self is like highly developed by the labels that we or by our membership to social groups, right? The positive thing about that is our connection to those groups can help us with our self-esteem and our confidence and our pride, right? So kind of like we're all talking about that, all of us in this space right now have identified ourselves within the bear umbrella. And that has been really helpful, right? And there are, a lot of other examples of that. But there are other ways where it's not helpful, right? Where it creates like an us versus them scenario. And that can be where this is the double-edged sword of labeling ourselves. Like, oh, you're not a bear, right? Or you're not a
Mhm.
pup, or and that always reminds me of so Brene Brown in her book Atlas of the Heart talks about the difference between belonging and fitting in, right? And that like, and when I first heard that dichotomy thing there, I thought about that. What are the, like specifically for bears, right? There are things that like are check boxes, right? Like, oh, you have this, you have this, you have this, and therein you fit in
Right.
as a bear. But like I think that, and that was the one thing that I really appreciated about Drenched Fur, right, was this thing about belonging, right? That like it doesn't matter, like you're here, it doesn't matter, right? Like the bear community is very all welcoming. Um, and that can sense more of a sense of belonging, a sense of togetherness, sense of pride, fitting in,
Yeah.
or not fitting in, but
Belong.
acceptance.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of the the positive side of labels in a way is that we often, as we were saying, we use them as a way to find other people like us when we're out there on our own, lonesome, trying to find things. I mean, I'm going back to sort of coming out and finding other gay people when I was in college and being like,
Mhm.
yeah. Now, were we all the same? Absolutely not. But we had something in common in that we all had this similar, we could put ourselves under this similar umbrella. And that helped us in a way to find acceptance in ourselves and find acceptance in the world, or at least in this little corner of this world for the 4 years while you're in college, depending on how long you're there. Um, you could be like, okay, I have this group of people that I know are like me, and therefore this is where I, like you said, this is where I belong, and yay, I'm happy to have that because I don't think I would have had it otherwise. And then moving on from that, you had that opportunity to build yourself up in a way and gain some confidence that you probably didn't have before.
Well, and also, I mean, for my journey, I agree with you. Like, I found a tribe by coming out in college, but then I figured out that like that tribe was too broad, and then I
Mhm.
needed to, and then I eventually found another label, like a sub tribe of the greater one, in which I was like, oh, being gay is not enough. And so
Mhm.
later, 8 years, 8 years down the road, I like ended up finding locally about like the bear community in a way other than what was online, that was in a chat room, so to speak. And that really kind of changed things. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a big piece of it, is I think the labels that we're talking about, for the past few minutes is about inclusion or acceptance, like, finding your grouping in which you feel that there's like-mindedness or
Mhm.
some similarities, that there's um, a natural cohesion, I guess,
Yeah.
amongst
Hmm.
the individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of like what I said before, like um, we label everything, right? Kind of like what Gary was talking about before. And another way that I see labels done that I see can be another way is the double-edged sword of the labels that we give ourselves or that are put upon us, like in my field, right, mental health disorders,
Mhm.
and like diagnoses and like medical diagnoses, and sometimes with that can be really helpful for people, right? Like when they find, like for me, right, when they um find that, hey, like here are all the areas that I've been struggling, and like they all fit within this criteria, that say that, hey, this is something that you're struggling with that is very common among people who have this specific thing, right? And
Mhm.
that can be really, really helpful to know, oh, great, there are things that I can do to like help me with this, right? And but then sometimes that cannot be helpful, right? When like the label is seen as something bad or not good or scary or like fearful, and that is, we can talk about that in terms of like this other theory called labeling theory, which the way that we see ourselves and the way that we behave can be largely, indicated by the way that other people see us and other people
Mhm.
label us, right? So, like, if if I act out as a kid, right, and they're like, "Oh, you're hyperactive or you're out of control," right? Like then somebody's putting a label on me, and that can sometimes not be seen positively.
Right.
And then I can start thinking, oh, I'm a bad kid, right? Because I have a hard time doing these things, right?
Right. Right.
Um, Same thing with um, like there's another group of diagnoses that I really struggle with because I think they can be really damning, which is like personality disorders.
Mm.
And like within my field, that can be really hard for people when they find out that like, hey, because of these things, you are seen as somebody who has a borderline personality disorder or something, right?
Right.
Um, and that can be really helpful for people, but then it can also be like not helpful. A lot of
Yeah.
times people don't take that well, um, because there are um, opinions, thoughts, beliefs about quote unquote those people.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, and I've
uh,
seen that. I mean, how we've tried to modify language over time and
mhm.
look at things differently. So, like in my field of work with HIV, we changed how we refer to individuals to use what we call person first language. So,
Yeah.
like we talk about them as persons living with HIV, um, as opposed to other past references. And yeah, it's interesting how like we kind of modify that, and then the things that come with that, like people have prescribed concepts of an individual. So like long ago in the 80s and the 90s, like individuals who had HIV were seen a certain way.
Hmm.
There was a lot of judgment about the label of a person, and their diagnosis and what that meant. And now we've reached a point, like due to medical advances, that like we talk about undetectable. And
Hmm.
so how if an individual is tested and you can't detect HIV even though they have it, that means that the transmission possibility is near zero,
Right.
and kind of what that infers. And so to me it's kind of a flipping of the script, about like the potential of what you see for a person in their life. So I agree with you, Ed. Like there's a lot of that can come with the fields of those things. um, I remember for a long time, like people used to talk about diabetes a certain way. And now that we've had like the onset of these new medications over the past handful of years,
Yeah.
like I think that's also changing the viewpoints of how people are seen when folks find out that they're taking these medicines to help them with
Right.
their health, um, and that it's making changes in a lot of different ways. And
Hmm.
so I think that that's modifying people's mindsets about labels, at least certain labels, I should say. That's the best way to
Right.
phrase it.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, it often falls down to like stigma. in a way. So I was
Yeah.
thinking, I was just like, when you brought up the HIV and all of those things, I was like, yeah, certain labels have certain things, either positive or negative, attached to them. Like somewhat positive when you would think about it as a child is, oh, he's such an overachiever. Oh, he's so, great at school. Like you would think of those really positive things. But as someone, me, who got that label, um, it becomes negative when it's seen as a issue when you don't do as well.
Yep.
And the label is, you were such an overachiever, what happened, kind of thing. And that becomes a big sort of issue. And um with regards to people living with HIV and stuff, the one, like, we've been talking about that for decades, the clean versus like
Right.
and I've remembered that word, and I've hated that word for so many years now. But I remember it being so commonplace, especially when I first started getting online, and the naive person that I was at a time, and I will admit this, like, first time I remember, I'm having a flashback. The first time I remember someone saying, "Are you clean?" And I was like, "Yeah, I took a shower today."
Mm.
And I wasn't like, again, like, didn't know what it meant. And fortunately, the person was not an asshole and didn't laugh in my face in a way, but was like, "No, I mean, do you have this, or are you, DD free or whatever?" And I was just like, "Oh," but like that clean label has been such a stigma for so long that um, I know we're fighting it in a lot of ways now, but I still see it,
Well, I mean, and I think this, what it comes down to is like it isn't until it personally affects you that you reconsider what the definition and the stigma is about a label in that
Right.
case. So like I was talking about, like with the weight loss drugs and stuff, like people were passing judgment on people using it as like, oh, that's a cheat or that's a whatever, until they find themselves in need and or they end up utilizing it, and then they realize like, oh, there's actually benefit to this, like, and I think that happens to a lot of people, that they have to have a personal experience to understand what that is. So like people can be very dismissive and talk negatively about individuals who are dealing with addiction, and until you have a person in your life that you know and can understand what their life's experience is with misuse of, items or, behaviors, that like how that impacts them, I think it's very much like, well, that's not me. Like, and I
Right.
don't think that's what people want to say out loud. They just don't realize how they're ascribing a label, and they're like drawing a divide or a wedge or whatever you want to say. Like they're creating a distance because they don't think of it that way. It's like, oh, well, those people, they're from the other side of the tracks. Do you know what I mean? Like they say all
Mhm.
sorts of things, and you're just like, what the hell?
Yep.
Yeah, addiction's a good one, right? Like the label of addict, right?
Mm,
Because addict, alcoholic, right? Like, there are communities, right, that have, repurposed those terms, right? Where, like in Alcoholics Anonymous or in Narcotics Anonymous, where that is how they refer to themselves, right?
yeah.
Um, and that is also as the sense of community, right? Of pride,
Yeah. And I
which is
think
really
that's,
interesting.
yeah, reclaiming things has often been a very interesting, like, especially labels, in a ways, reclaiming labels in a sense of turning these potentially negative words that were thrown at you for years or whatever into a positive, uplifting thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Mm.
odd power of the labels that, can be a thing. The word that just came to mind was queer for me.
Yep.
Um, uh, like, for a long time, it was very much a negative word, and then we've learned, especially, I don't want to say recent because I think it's been a while, that we've reclaimed that and taken that and used that as sort of a positive umbrella for the community at large. And there are still people that don't want that word, and I'll respect that. When you were called that for years at a time, you're not going to be able to get over your own um, issue or stigma with it to move past it, and that's okay. But you should be willing to accept that while you choose not to use that label, someone else should be allowed to use it as well. And while you may not understand why they use it, realistically, it's not for you to understand.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I think there's a sense of empowerment in like taking a word that is a label and like kind of turning it on its head and using it a different way. Like I think about like how for a while, people would kind of eschew or stay away from like certain terms like daddy or boy. And like kind of, some people would talk disparagingly about that. Like it makes me laugh because I still see it to this day. I see guys that describe themselves in their profiles and they're like, I have a dad bod. And there's a part of me that's like, is that really still a relevant thing? And I'm not saying that it's not, but I'm like, I understood like when it kind of came about, it was describing a guy who sort of in a judgmental way, people would say like, let himself go, as in like, he's not this, trim, active kind of individual.
Eligible bachelor.
What's that?
Eligible bachelor.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I think the original intention was like, because you're a dad, because you're now like, you have your commitments and your life and your wife and what have you. So you're settled. You've let yourself go because you're like,
right.
I've got it all now.
Well, and I think there might have been some like, there might have been some undercoating of that, like unavailability. Because the presumption is, like, you're a father now, like you have, commitments, like I said, and kids and whatever. So like, I don't know, like I kind of find that stuff interesting, but there's a point of me. It's like when the label becomes so ubiquitous, like so universal, does it hold the strength that it used to? And I don't know. Like, I think it diminishes its possibility or its impact over time. Like if it's not as much as it used to be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think about it this way, like we've talked about it before, Ed, like, about, we were kind of making fun of like all these labels and, about side. I see it more and more and more. So it makes me think about like in another 10 years, will that be just as common, quote unquote, as like the other position, quote unquote, activity labels that are out there? And will it not have the same impact? Because in the first couple of years that side was being used, I don't want to say it was aversive, but it was new, it was different, and people had to talk about it and engage, like, and find out about it. And,
people are still very much not on board with the concept of sides, which is
really
hilarious. Yeah.
Oh,
I just saw somebody's profile. It was a picture of somebody's profile that said, in all caps, not into sides. And I said, it's okay, babe. Just, you can just admit that your oral game is weak.
Oh.
I mean, fact though. Well, that should be more fact, but whatever.
I would want to question them because I see where you are there, but I also can look at that and be like, it must mean that he would like anal sometime during this process, during the session.
Maybe.
So it's not that the oral game is weak. It's more of, I don't want to just do that.
Well,
that's another impersonation for the same thing, but also it's lame to say what you're not into. More of saying what you are into.
I think when I see that kind of a strong stance,
yeah,
immediately a part of my mind goes to, Who hurt you?
Yeah.
Like, because you're putting some stuff out there, like you're putting your business out there in such a statement that really comes across to me like you've been hurt, as in you've been burned, you are annoyed, you are frustrated, like perhaps
Yeah.
you've, gone through a series of people that you've met and then you find out like things aren't going to happen because
Yeah.
they're not into that, and like that's disappointing to you. And all of that is incredibly valid, but there's a part of me that's like, baby, calm down. Like, it's not that serious. Like I get that you want to put
You
that
would
out
think
there,
so.
but all caps and exclamation points.
Oh.
Like, yeah, I'm like, okay, that's a bit much.
And that's sort of where, like, I get what like Jeff was saying, but I feel like if you're that like no sides kind of thing, like that's a very extreme way to like dismiss a whole bunch of people potentially. It's very just telling of, again, I get it. If you just want to get like pounded, into the bed like no tomorrow, or you want to just pound somebody into the bed like no tomorrow, and you only have so much time to do that, I get it. Like, you get what you want, and that's all that you want. And if you're getting inundated with people that are like, I want to like cuddle, or I want to like do this and this and like, and you don't want, like, no, I want to do this. That's it.
Right.
Like, fuck all y'all. I want to fuck. Like,
Here's a curiosity, just question, wondering. So, let's say he didn't phrase it that way. Didn't use all caps either. Or maybe he used caps, but he said must be into anal or something like that. Would that make anything? Would that make any difference?
I think so. Like, I mean, like I've
Yes.
said often, like, tell me what you're into. I don't care what you're not into.
Okay.
If you're into like anal, let me know so I can say, hey, that's, yay or nay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like we're
and
not.
that's kind of where,
Guess we're not a match. That's fine. There's
yeah,
nothing wrong
and
with
that's
that.
kind of, what I feel like, instead of the negative way he put it, like not into sides. If he had said, I'd be a little affronted if you just put it all like in all caps, like only into anal. Like, if he was in all caps that loud, it's like, that's a bit much. But like, prefer, I am looking for anal sex only.
Right.
Even with I don't only
And
gives
to,
it, like,
to Jeff's point of his question, like that was where I was thinking ahead. I was like, yeah, like it's all about your communication style. Like, first of all, baby, you don't need to yell. Second, like you can be passive in how you explain things to people. So to me, it's like if let's say, I'm talking to a group of people and like let's say the five of us are going, or four of us. Five of us? Four. Anyways. There's four images on the screen and I was counting myself twice. I don't know why. But let's say the four of us are going to get together for dinner and I'm like, hey, I'm going to make chili. Is everybody okay with that? Like, Ed can say, yeah, cool. I'm not a fan of onions. Or he can be like, for the love of everything, do not put onions in the chili. Like, do you see what I mean? It's just like,
yeah,
girl.
Yeah, but
like
if you don't have onions in the chili, is it really chili?
Anyways.
That's a side comment, not being serious about anything. Anyways, moving on.
No, I know, but your point is well taken. It's like, but I'm kind of like, all you have to do is be polite, I guess, about it in your communication style or whatever. And so it's like, so I know we talked about this years ago where we talked about the whole like no fats, no femmes thing.
Mm-hmm.
And some people really kind of took umbrage with it. But there was a part of me that's like, you're kind of making it clear from the beginning what you're not interested in. And guess what? I'm not interested in you now. So like, I think it worked for both of us. Like I figured out real quick, like that's not a thing.
It's sort of again, like bringing it back to kind of labels in a way. Like, the labels like no fat, no femme, those kind of things, and no side kind of part. Like, yeah, you're able to put these labels on their thing, and people who identify as those things will be like, oh, okay, so you're not going to be into me, so like swipe left or right or whatever it is, or you know, or whatever. Like, but it gives that sort of the power of the label in a way, in that it's an easier identifier. And in this way, it's an easy identifier to be like, I don't want to fuck with that person. Because if you're going
Well,
to throw those labels out there for the things that you don't want, cool. If I'm that person, if I am that label or I identify as that label, I know no matter what I say or do or try, nothing is going to convince you, because we are not going to be a match.
so this is kind of the way I feel about it. There is a distinct difference between like, what is the intent? Like,
Mm,
so because we were just throwing out a bunch of labels and it was all kind of like related in some fashion around sex, basically. And
right.
because men, by stereotype, I guess is the best way to phrase it, are very transactional in terms of
Hmm.
sex. Like, there's a very specific focus and
Hmm.
outcome desired. I think that is a whole different circumstance than otherwise in the world, because labels only tell you so much. Like, they only give you insight to a specific thing. Like, you could refer to yourself as like a geek or a nerd, like that only tells you a certain thing. It doesn't tell you everything that's encompassing. And so I think it's also incumbent on, it's sort of the responsibility of the person seeing the label to determine whether or not that is going to be, I guess, all encompassing, or like, is it going to explain things thoroughly, in a way so that people have a good understanding or a good feeling about whatever that is. So, I mean,
Right.
it's like, I guess I'll think of it this way. Like, I know people that are furries, but furry to me is a label, but it's not everything. Like, it's
Mm,
not everything of who they are. And also there's so much variety within that community as
mm,
label. Like, you can't really, I don't think it's effective to look at it and be like, oh, I hear this word and then I automatically have already figured everybody out
right.
that uses that label, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And to go back to the whole no fats, no femmes thing, and like also talking about the double-edged side of labels, right? When you hear somebody say no fats, no femmes, there's this like underlying message that there's something wrong with that.
Mm,
So like then it creates stigma, creates discrimination, right? Which is why we want to push back against people
Yeah.
say no fats, no femmes.
right. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And the other thing when it comes to labels are that labels are really what they don't do is they don't help, kind of like what Gary was talking about. They don't take into consideration the complex nature of humanity, and that that we're very diverse and there's like wholeness, right? And that there's sometimes spectrums of identities, right? So with that this can help reinforce, so labels can help reinforce stereotypes and discrimination. So like we know about queer theory, right? Right. So queer theory was like kind of used as a way to act against identity politics, but in doing so, um, it it then reinforced identity politics.
Yeah.
So like it was like this um what do you call it, loop.
Mm,
Which is interesting.
yeah. Yeah, that's sort of the thing. Like, well, we've talked about it often with like the bear community, and we were kind of discussing earlier with like our labels and like we broke off from the gay community because we felt we weren't accepted in there. So now we're bears, and like you can be a bear too, and we're all bears, blah 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 blah. And then it sort of looped back into this self um not self stigmatizing, but like separation. And we started becoming the people that were like, you can be a bear and you cannot be a bear
Yeah,
because
us
of
first
sort
them.
of criteria. Yeah. It very much becomes that point to where it becomes this like, do I really want to be a bear if this is what bears are seen as?
Hmm.
Well, I mean, I've heard many a time from people in certain communities, like their experiences that are not a part of the bear community, choose not to be part of it or ascribe that label, and they flat out say, like, why would I want to be a part of such a like discriminating bunch of bigots or whatever?
Mhm.
Like because they see from their viewpoint and from their experience explicitly that it's not welcoming and it's
Right.
not like as open or whatever. And I think that that's understandable, and it goes back to like one experience does not represent all, just like one label does not necessarily represent all, um
Right.
in that case. And so I think about how, I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, my mom had a talk with me about my grandparents and how they were of a different generation and that in essence they would be called racist.
Mhm.
And my mom wasn't excusing them, but basically said like their experience to date has given them like negative impressions, and like they carry that forward.
Mhm.
That is not all of who they are, but she was also not excusing their behavior. Like she
Right.
was trying to
Hmm.
give me perspective about why they say the things the way they do or the way they view things the way they do. And I found that really interesting because I think about that now, like in a conversation like this, where I'm like, yeah, like there are all kinds of individuals in the world. And, some people would refer to others as sluts. Other people would be like, they're sexually adventurous, or, they're just very active as opposed to promiscuous. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like
Mhm. Mhm.
and also it gets very confusing, I think, for people on the outside because they don't understand how labels work. So I remember after I had come out, I was referring to like other gay males as she or her. And my mother was like, wait, there's a woman? And I'm like, no. And she's like, why do you guys do that? And I was like, what? She goes, why do you refer to other men as women? She goes, I don't, she's like, isn't the whole point to to be gay, like to be a man? And so like again, like how you ascribe a label, it paints a certain picture or a certain definition,
Mhm.
and if you're not a part of that community, it can be more confusing to hear the label or the word and not understand quite what it means or its context or
Right.
how that comes about. Just like I imagine, because we were talking about sides earlier, I'm like I could easily see, like I have it on a small list of things for work to talk with my coworkers about, because we do a sexual health clinic and people come in, and get tested and that kind of stuff. And so we do some like education and awareness. And my thought is like I want the staff to be aware of these things if it gets presented to them. So
Mhm.
if someone was to
Hmm.
come in and describe their sexual activity and you ask them about, do they participate, in anal, and they say, no, I'm a side. I would want to kind of want the staff to know ahead of time what that means.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't become a weird circumstance for them, and they're like, I've never heard that before. Like, what is it?
Right.
Because not
Right.
every patient is willing to be your teacher.
Also that.
Because I've heard
Very
many a
much
time it's like it is not my responsibility to teach you or to learn you on XYZ.
so. Mhm.
Yep.
And
And it's
so
Dude,
yeah, like I mean, I have a good coworker that I work with that we've reached a point now where they talk to me about things and they actually have said, "Hey, can I ask you something that's kind of personal?" Like, and when we have a very important but in-depth conversation, but that's because I'm willing to engage on that level and talk about something to help them
right.
better understand a concept or an idea or whatever it is. Um, but I know that not everyone's that way, and so it's totally possible for a person to hear you like misuse a label and then also call you out on it and be like, you don't know what you're talking about. And also, I am not Encyclopedia Britannica. Fucking Google that shit or whatever. Like, it's not my job to help you be
Yeah.
better or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So true. I just and good to like get knowledge out there, because you may come across a label that you don't understand and may need clarification. And sometimes, let me Google that for you is not available.
Well, and I think the other thing that's really important is that, like, also labels, like when somebody's coming to my office and they say there's something, right? I like to say, hey, what does that mean to you?
Mm,
Because what it means to me might not be the same that it means to somebody else, and I don't want to put my worldview onto somebody else, right? So, like, you know, say somebody says I have anxiety or I'm depressed or whatever. I was like, okay, so what does that mean for you? Right?
right.
How does
Right.
that show up for you in your life? Right? Because I have a list of criteria, right? But like, it would be helpful for me to understand from somebody else's perspective how they see themselves. Right. And I'm like, okay, so like, does that work for you? Do you want to do anything different? Right. But like, let's take side, for example, right? Like, somebody say, "Oh, I'm a side." Okay, so what does that mean for you, right? That could mean that, hey, sometimes if the mood is right and the it's Friday the 13th, and they're vibing with somebody, right? Maybe they are open to anal, right? Um,
Right.
but
Yeah.
it would be helpful to know what a label means to somebody else.
Well, I mean, that's like, look at asexuality. People think asexuality means that
Oh yeah,
that you don't have sex. And it's like, no, it's not anti-sex. It's not what it stands for. It's a different part of the behavior, spectrum, I guess, the best way to phrase it. Like, there are degrees of that, and they're just more aware in terms of their self as to how they see themselves, and that is not the same as others.
yeah.
And I've had to kind of say that a couple times with a coworker or two, because I get the impression that they presume that has one definition, one use. And
Yeah.
so that's not necessarily the case. And that's always like, that's the whole thing about labels. Like, it's language is ever evolving, like how we utilize it and what we do with it. And I think that is where people struggle, because they don't understand the new definitions or the new usage or what it could mean or represent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that as I get older. Like, there's plenty of like terms or words or phrases now that are probably used that I don't necessarily hear. And if I was to hear them I'm kind of making a broad presumption, by younger generation, I just wouldn't get it.
Mm,
So, and I'm okay with that. Like, I don't have to necessarily understand that. Also, I've lived enough life now to recognize that some of this is a phase and this is going to go away. And in another 15 to 20 years, you're going to be posting online or whatever it is that we do in the future and be like, oh, you remember how foolish we were back in the 2020s when we used to say, blah, blah, blah. So,
Yeah. And one of the other things that's important to mention when it comes to labels are they can be really restricting. So if you hold or very limiting too, but like, so if you hold them really, really tightly, it limits what your behaviors, right? So like you can say, oh, because I am this, like I can only do these things, right? Like, um, say I'm somebody who has ADHD, right? And like I'm really holding that really tightly, like, and that is part of my self-concept, right? Like it can sometimes give me permission to like, oh, well, it's okay if I'm late, or it's okay if I'm doing these things, right? It's a part of who I am or whatever.
yeah.
Or, even somebody with anxiety, right? It can be like, oh, well, I can't do that. I have anxiety. I can't
Yeah.
do that. I can't take risks.
Mm,
Um, you know, um, and so it can not be helpful, right? Or even, I don't know, what's some other examples of that?
well, I mean, think of it like we were talking about, like top, bottom, like,
Yeah.
there was a time in our lives, I don't remember anybody talking about verse or
mhm.
versatility. Like, either you gave it or you took it. Like, that
Yep.
was it. There was only two possibilities if you were
Right.
going to be a gay man. And I remember back in the day where I struggled with that, because I was like, well, I don't really know what I am. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, and people would ask me, and I'd be like, I don't really think of it in those terms. And I would get called out, like even like we still do to this day about like bi erasure or bisexuality erasing. Like people would not allow you to be uncommitted to a label.
Right.
They would be like, they were like, oh, so you're a bottom because you didn't want to own that you were a bottom, or you were afraid to say you were a bottom, whatever. And
Right.
I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't know. Like,
It's sort of
honestly, if he's sexy enough and it looks fun, I'll probably stick it in. Like, you know, like I don't know. Like you have to give me a chance. You
Right.
know, I mean, it's like, you know, and if it looks like, you know, it's the black hole and it's going to suck me in, well, then I got to take that into account. I mean, I don't know. Like, you know, it's just, I think people,
no,
they want so desperately to be able, like, back to the whole conventionalism of why we have labels. Like, we want to be able to quickly know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
man,
Yeah,
the human
put
brain
somebody
just
into a category.
right. The human brain just struggles with the unknown.
Yep.
Yep.
Like the whole
You said
you're at
that.
a party.
Sorry. We're just a bunch of 6-year-olds here, anyways.
Damn it, Gary. the you're at a party and it has that like cup identifier thing, and you have to grab a cup, and that's the one you are. Like there was the top, bottom, verse.
Oh yeah, the
you know,
colors. Yeah.
Yeah, verse top, verse bottom. Like we've seen the meme, and I'm just like, that sounds great in theory, but like, what if you don't fall into any of these? Like, what if you're not into any of these things? Do you just not drink? Like, is that like the goal, or do you just pick one and then you have to for the rest of the night be like, well, I'm not really interested?
Or you
And
could be subversive and you bring a clear cup.
I mean that
Yeah.
part. But you know, but again,
And then
like
you're just like, fuck all this, embrace anarchy. Anyways.
but yeah, but like the like you were just talking about, like the bisexuality, that was one of the ones I was going to bring up. Like the whole idea or concept that being bisexual means that you're only on one side at a certain point in time. Like that shit got on my nerves so much. And I mean, I'm not bisexual, but it was a personal like thought process I had to get out of my head when meeting and seeing other the screen disappeared.
Oh,
What the hell?
Dun dun dun.
What another quarter in the meter.
But no, but what I'm saying is that was the idea of um like I had, like, again, I had to get it out of my head that was the thing. Like you were interested in one, and then you were interested in the other, but realistically you're interested in both, and you could potentially be interested in both at the same time. Like it's not
right.
so difficult a concept to understand, but it was so difficult for the brain to realize that, like, you like both? How? Why? There's so many differences between the two. But you know,
right, but this is what it comes down to. Like, this is what cracks me up is like, why can't you enjoy both tacos and burritos? Like, really? Like, is it that difficult?
I mean, sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't.
Right.
But no, but you know, again, the labels can be limiting, and that's sort of the bad part of it in a way. The negative part of it in a way is that we appreciate the labels until they don't work.
Well, and apps don't help.
True.
Well, they tend to be slow to catching up to the culture.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Well,
And
although I think
like,
they're getting a little better.
Like, I mean, more of like when you're chatting some up on an app, how do you describe the thing? And sometimes a label is just an easier way to describe something.
Mm-hmm.
And so people use labels, and sometimes not necessarily in the best way.
And it helps if people actually read the fucking labels.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Or
Just-
actually bothered to read the profile.
That part too.
Exactly.
Because like my biggest issue is and will always be to this day, like I have had to intentionally scrub top from almost all the things I do because it is not my major forefront anymore in recent years. It is not the main goal anymore. Um, can I do it? Yes, but in it's
People
become
change.
more of a it's become more of a um right mindset, right moment kind of thing as opposed to I want to fuck. Um, and
Right.
and still to this fucking day, like I could probably like I'm literally on like I just because I got a message. I was like, oh, let me check Sniffy. Like I checked my message and I'm like, oh yeah, let's see how long it takes for someone to be like, well fuck, and I'd be like, no, I don't actually. And if you had taken 2 seconds to read my profile, you would see that it says side. But you know, whatever. Go on.
Yep.
Unintentional labels, putting labels on someone else. Like you see a dick pic and you immediately think they're a top. You see an ass pic, you immediately think they're a bottom.
Okay, since you brought that up, I got to bring up this sidebar. This is an annoyance of mine when people put up the label side and then they put their butthole in their profile, like as a picture. And I'm like, no offense, that's a mixed signal for me. I don't understand why you're advertising that, and yet you're saying like I'm like I get that like there's a lot of variations, I guess, of side, but I'm like it's confusing.
I don't know. A lot of sides that I know really like having their ass eaten.
Yeah.
True.
Well, then put that in the profile as well, like you know.
Yeah, but what they
fair.
want to show the ass what you're gonna eat. They're trying to show you their
describe
cake.
it somehow. Call yourself
versus
like
pie.
Old Country Buffet. I don't know, like you know.
Whole
just-
country buffet.
They want your pie hole on their cake.
Hilarious.
I mean, I'm just like, I don't know. Like it just like my
I
brain
get it.
is
get
a speed train, and then it derails because I'm like, wait, what? I'm
I
like,
get it.
you're a
because
side, but you're showing me your chocolate starfish. I'm so confused. Like, what are we trying to do here?
Because we show all angles.
I think.
Well,
Yeah,
I guess
I
there's a
think
part of
this
me-
is something that we need to help our community learn. Is read the text, and when using the text as context, you look at the pictures. So if they say they're a side, they're showing you their hole. They're looking for some analingus there. They want a little tongue action on their back side.
or they're using labels they don't understand what they mean. Like they're just checking all the boxes.
And you know what a great
Catch
way
all.
to get clarification for that is?
Ask
Ask.
them. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Ask
amount
them.
of the
I
amount
have
of guys
to ask you a question.
Yes. The amount of guys I see that are on ChatterBait and they say that they're only into women. And then like you're chatting with them and you find out they're gay. And I'm just like, like, why do
That's
you
a different
list on the
matter
profile
altogether.
that you're only into women, but you're actually gay? Like you identify as gay. I'm like, I'm what? I'm like, was
I
that
am
laziness? And I don't even want to ask the question because now I feel like it's going to get awkward and it's going to change the mood. And listen, I'm only here for so many minutes. Like that's what this is about. So, like,
Just looking to go, get it going, and get it off and get it going. Like I got stuff to do. I got shit to do. Like let's.
Yeah.
Got a pretty
Well,
body.
so on the topic of labels, right? So
Mhm.
so over the years, right, I have seen a few things that I think has been really helpful in my viewpoint of labels. If anybody has seen the Strange Loop, that is a wonderful piece of theater that talks about labels and how there's, and it's do I have it right here? No. Oh, it's right over there. But it's based on this book called The Strange Loop, which is a philosophical theory about our identity. We hold on. We develop our identity, which when we the more that we develop our identity, we develop our identity, which helps us develop our identity. So it's this like loop.
Mm.
The ways that people talk about us helps identify our identity, and the way that we talk about ourselves helps identify our identity. And it's really really interesting, and it's a wonderful piece of theater. But there's this other documentary on Hulu. I think it's on Hulu that I always recommend called "In and of Itself," which talks about the illusion of identity. And it's an hour. I highly recommend it. I don't want to say too much about it. But like, give yourself an hour, put down your phone, watch it, and it's really beautiful and talks about how all of our identities are just an illusion. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it uses magic. We love magic, right? Some people do. Some people are freaked out by magic. But some other things, like, so I really like the idea that, like, kind of like what I said, a lot of people hold their labels too tightly and they make their entire personality based on one aspect of themselves. So I also like to remind people that they are a stained glass window that is made up of all parts of them. The good and then maybe not so good and the ugly, right? But they are all there to create this very beautiful piece of art, right? And you're not just one part, you're all of them. And that it's really important that we remind ourselves to hold our labels lightly. That we hold on them too tightly, it's very restrictive. But if we let them breathe a little bit, it can really greatly have an impact on the amount of action that we can do. And the story that I like to do with that is when I first got clean, right? I remember having this like really negative viewpoint of myself and asking myself the question, what if the person that I actually am is far greater than the person I ever thought I was? And that really had a great impact of what I did for the next however many years. And then the one thing that I love, I just heard this on a that training that I mentioned at the beginning, right? This acceptance and commitment therapy for people with ADHD. And the guy, Russ Harris, said, the label on the jam jar is not the jam.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Oh shit! Sorry.
Sit with that one for a moment. I read that on the doc when you earlier, Ed, when you put that down, and I was like, that is so spot on. Because people probably don't think of it that way. Like, they don't consider that, like, that is not it. I'm struggling to figure out how to say this. Like it is, like, that is not the definition
of who you are.
Right. And to your point about the stained glass window, like, analogy is like, it is just one aspect, not the whole. The entirety of that. So yeah, the label on the jam jar is not the jam. And when you think about it, like, metaphorically, also very realistically, it's like, right, the label is the label on the jar, and it is describing the contents. It is not the actual contents.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just deep.
Look at you, Ed, just showing up and dropping deep stuff like that.
Well, that's what I do. I drop it like it's hot.
I love it. I do. Yeah. That. No words.
Yeah, that's why I put that on the dock last. And I think that's a good kind of coda.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, and you know, what it comes down to is like it is describing the contents, but it is not the contents.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing for people to recognize is like that's what labels do. They describe.
But that's not all that you are.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I mean, it's like, and if you really get into it, like from a scientific level, it's like we are just like. I always kind of laugh when people post things and be like, "I am what is it? I am a highly active biologic stressed bag of meat walking around." I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like people kind of twist things on their head, and it's kind of like, yes, we are technically made up of nothing, but we are, you know, atoms that happen to have decided to coalesce together in a certain fashion to make up what we are. So, you know, it's I think it's helpful to have perspective like that, and I think that's what that last quote is doing, is like giving you a concept to think about,
Right.
in that style.
Perspective. Mm-hmm.
Very true. Good stuff.
Good
Anything else as
stuff.
we go to wrap up, Ed?
I don't think so. I think that's a good thing to end on. That you're more than the label that you are giving yourself,
Mm.
or that other people are giving you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Guess what? That's the end. Oh, it's always sad to end the show when Ed is on, because we love him.
Oh, I love you too.
There's plenty of ways to contact us. Tell us how much you love Ed. You can do that in many ways. You can pop over to our website, cubsoutloud.com. She's comment on the blog. Shoot us an email at cubsoutloud@gmail.com. Leave us a voicemail, sexy or otherwise, at 361-COL Talk. That's 361-265-8255. Leave sweet nothings for us, or Ed, or any of our guests. But, you know, he's here. You can find us on our various social media outlets at Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter, and of course right here on YouTube where we stream live. At Cubs Out Loud, the appropriate place of the URL. You can join our entourage chat at bit.ly/telegram-COL. You can find out when we're planning or recording these shows and what we're doing next week. I gave a tease earlier in the show. What was that tease? You can find out at bit.ly/calendar-COL. You can also get various accoutrements, such as Consent is My Foreplay shirt that both hosts are wearing in the exact same style, different colors, because we got multiple colors. Or hat, or mug, or a handy towel. Actually, an entire towel set. You could get an entire towel set. There's a handy towel.
Boy, is that handy. It was just right there for Damon to grab.
You do that at zazzle.com/cubsoutloud. Some of his designs were designed by Smashy. You can find more of his work at tpublic.com/user/Smashy the Bear. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/cubsoutloud or send us a donation at paypal.me/cubsoutloud. But please pop over to your favorite podcasting platform, rate us, review us, or if you're watching us, you can subscribe to us here. Like, comment, and subscribe. Or if you just want to hear our lovely voices driving in the car, it's probably better to do it by your podcasting player. You can find us on the various outlets and subscribe to us there. Find me anywhere on the internet. It's box up, box, flippy, box, cub, box, something or other. Damon?
If you wish to get in touch with me, you can find me as Theater Cup 79. That's TheaterCub79 on most their related sites. And you can find me as Pup, Pup Umbra 79 on Blue Sky or Pup underscore Umbra on the other site. You can find me, those are not safe for work. For safe for work stuff, you want to find me as DMA Gamer 79 on TikTok, Blue Sky, and the other site. Gary.
If you would like to get in touch with me, you can pretty much find me anywhere online as CareBear73. Ed, if folks want to get in touch with you, how should they do so?
Yeah, you can feel free to find me on Facebook. There is Edward AC. I'm on TikTok as dr.unicub79. And you can find me on Instagram at dr.unicub hyphen or underscore sex brain wizard. And that's about it.
Okay.
And with that, say good night, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good one, y'all.
Bye.